Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Whiskey Uncorked, where today we are going to be looking into whether or not the Glen Moray 18 is the best value in single malt Scotch in 2024. So before we get started, I did want to point out to those of you who have been following the Uncorked podcast, again, I never really intended that to be like a thing, like an official podcast, but it does seem that there are people that are watching it and enjoying it, and I looked into it, and I have uploaded those episodes to the regular podcasting platforms. So I know for sure you can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. Obviously, there is now a podcast section in YouTube that I've made sure that's all set up and it's appearing there. And I've added the RSS feed to a few of the other services that have podcasts as well. So if you do want to see the podcast on a specific platform, let me know. I should be able to get it added, no problem. So as I mentioned, today we are talking about the Glen Moray 18-year-old. And the reason why I wanted to do this one today was because it's kind of in contrast to maybe the last two 18-year-old single malts that I've reviewed in the Annock 18 and the brand new Bruichladdich 18. So let's talk about the bottle right up front. This thing is coming in at 47.2%. So we are even above the 46% threshold, not quite as high as the Bruichladdich 18, which is coming in at 50%, but it is non-chill filtered. It is aged in first fill American oak, so we can assume that means bourbon casks, and the flavors, like, spoiler alert, it's probably bourbon casks. Unfortunately, there probably is a touch of color in this. It is first fill, so you do expect some color after 18 years of aging, but it just got a little bit of that rose gold tint to it. There's no mention of natural color on the bottle or the somewhat ridiculous box that this comes in that I immediately threw out because it's ugly as hell. So, single malt Scotch, 47.6%, non-chill filtered. What does this cost? $120, $130, $150, $175, $200? Nope. This is coming in at $90, at least locally. I checked in Chicago. Looks like this might go up to about $100, but at $90, this is the cheapest single malt Scotch that you are going to be able to find regardless of proof. Now, if you do know of something cheaper with similar or better presentation, please let me know because I haven't been able to find one. And just to kind of reiterate, I'm going to grab my phone and I'm going to go to my Total Wine app here, which is not always the cheapest, but generally speaking, they often are, and they are probably going to be competitive the vast majority of the time. It's pretty rare that you see them more expensive than any of the other smaller retailers out there. So it's a good barometer check. All right, so I'm going to go through this list here. There's going to be a mix of single malts, blended scotches, and also these, white labeled bottles like Shildagh, and there's a Glenfodry and Glen Ness. These are brands that buy barrels from somewhere else and slap their own label on it. This is more common in bourbon, where, like with MGP whiskey or something, where a company will buy barrels, bottle it with their own brand slapped on it, and not really mention where the whiskey actually came from. So there's a few of those in there, but I can tell you they are not cheaper than this. The Jura 8, so the first one on the list, everybody's favorite. I think this one is 44%. Jura 18-year-old coming in at $130. I mentioned the Shildagh Space Side, $120. Duncan Taylor Blended Scotch, 18 year, $73. Alexander Murray Rare Blend, 18 year, $70. Invergordon 18 year single grain, $100. Aberfeldy 18, $130. Johnny Walker 18, $110. Buchanan's 18, $91. There's Macallan's here, the Macallan 18, the double cast $350, the Sherry Oak $430. Old Par, this is another blend, this is $70. Highland Park 18, $170. Glendronach 18, $220. Glenmorangie $140. Tomaten, 127. Bruichladdich, 175. Bamor, 190. Aberlour, 190. Chivas, 75. Glenlivet, 145. The Bunnahabhain, 370. The Dalmore, 320. Glengoyne, 200. Glen Grant, 130. There was another one or two in here. The Glen Ness I mentioned, that's 100. It's out of stock. Glenfodry, 18. Another one of these white labels, 130. Glenfiddich, it's out of stock, but it's listed as 130. Oban, 160. So you can see the only bottles that came anywhere close to this or that were cheaper were the kind of your traditional blends, or maybe even some of these blended scotches from independent bottlers like Alexander Murray. Also, there was a number of those whiskeys that were only going to be at 43% ABV, maybe even 40. There was a little bit of a mix arranged in there, but in terms of 46% non-chill filtered single malts, this doesn't have a competitor. I even checked the Speyburn 18-year-old, which Speyburn is kind of thought of as a bit of a budget brand with a high quality. Speyburn 18, it looks like that's somewhere in the $130 to $140 range these days. So the Annock 18 seems to range from kind of $130 up to $150. So as I mentioned, this thing does not have any competition in terms of price or presentation. So this thing wins on paper every single time, but does it stand up to all these other options in terms of how it tastes? All right, on the nose, here we go. So Glen Moray is a Speyside whiskey, and I think on the nose that makes itself pretty readily apparent, especially with it being bourbon cask. You are getting a bunch of malty flavors. There's some fruit here. I had settled on peaches at one point, but it is a little bit yellow. I've seen apricot used for this one. I'll go with that. I still pick up some peach on the palate, which I'll get into, but yeah, maybe just some yellow stone fruits, essentially. There might be some light cinnamon and nutmeg kind of notes in here. Pretty subdued. Overall, the nose is full, it's fragrant, but it is leaning towards that traditional Speyside, which doesn't mean that it's bad. There's a little bit of oak. You can get that this is not super young. It's a very kind of full, rounded experience. It smells very good. It's very pleasant. But if you're looking for something heavier, dirtier, super complex, this isn't going to be the one for you. All right, without any further ado, let's get to the palate. Cheers. Unmistakable vanilla and honey up front. Again, very tasty, but pretty straightforward, very familiar. You do get some dry, oaky notes all the way through the palate, but it complements everything really well. It does give it a little bit of depth, and it lets you know this has been an oak for 18 years. More into the back, that maltiness really explodes, the honey sticks with you, and you start to get that fruitiness that I really have been describing so far as like a peach tea. You could say there's a touch of citrus here, but it's not like an acidic citrus. This is a very kind of just, I guess you would say like a zesty lemon. It's very light, but I still stick with that peach. Now, peach tea. Apricots are absolutely a possibility. I'm not a big apricot person, so I don't eat a lot of them. Maybe dried apricots, and I think that's probably, I'm thinking of something that's a little bit more strongly flavored than this is. But you do get a touch of that spice, very, very light. And then on the finish, the oakiness kind of starts to show itself, a very lightly dry oakiness with this maybe a touch of bitterness, as well as some ginger. All right, let's do a second sip. Yeah, a lot more ginger on that sip. That ginger and peach tea, probably the best note. The thing that might separate this identifying character, at least for this particular bottle. And it's not strong, it's light, but it's very present, and overall the experience is very solid. You can get a touch of chocolate. I did try adding water to this, just a little bit, and I got actually quite a bit more chocolate on the palate and the finish after I added water. I liked it with water. We'll see how it goes. I'll probably play with it. I drank more than it looks, because when you get this bottle, it's filled up well into the neck. That's kind of shaped like the neck of a still, but I'm sure this bottle will evolve over time, and maybe things will become a little bit more clear. And if my opinion changes, I'll obviously review it or do a last drops review when the timing is right. Okay, overall thoughts. This is a really tasty whiskey. There's nothing wrong with it. There are no flaws. It is flavorful. It's an easy drinker, but there's just enough complexity, age, and a little interesting thing here or there to keep you occupied, I guess. But again, similar to the nose, if you're looking for something that's going to be challenging or has something weird or really identifiable about it, this isn't going to be the bottle that you want to pick up. But that's okay. Not every bottle needs to be like that. This is a viable representative version of Scotch whiskey, and it is a high quality version at that. It almost seems like, as a whiskey enthusiast or just regular whiskey drinker, like if you want a well-rounded, flavorful example of a single malt Scotch whiskey, Glen Moray 18 seems like a perfect example. And it's a great warm-up dram if you're looking for something a little bit better, a little bit bigger than your standard 12-year-olds, although that's kind of where the question comes in. This is the cheapest single malt 18-year-old Scotch that I can find available to me, particularly when you throw in the 46% or above and non-chill filtered aspects to it. This doesn't have much in the way of competition, but does the flavor hold up to the other 18-year-olds, or does this fall back and is more comparable to maybe some of your 12 or 14-year-old single malts that are even going to cost even less than $90? And that's really kind of where I get stuck with this. I get stuck with every whiskey. I always debate here and there, which is fine. That's what makes whiskey fun. Giving a score, it makes giving a score more difficult. But is this Bruichladdich 18? No. Is this Annock 18? No sherry. It's getting closer. But would I pay a whole lot more than $90 or $100 for this whiskey? It would start to push it. Because for as good as this whiskey is, you can find other flavors, or some of the flavors that you're getting in this bottle, in other scotches that do cost this. Here, the 18 years in first fill bourbon are doing a great job making a full flavored, easy to drink, easy sipper with enough layers, as I mentioned, to keep an enthusiast at least satisfied. So at the end of the day, in terms of value, I think if you're looking for something that is going to be a bit of a crowd pleaser, that's probably going to be inoffensive to just about everybody, provided that they do like drinking whiskey and that you are fairly well versed in just the ranges of single malts that are available. This is probably a bit of a no-brainer at the price point. However, if you are sitting in that 12-year-old age range, 10-year-old, that introductory bottle range, and you're paying that $60-ish for a lot of those bottles, plus or minus maybe $5. Do you stretch to hit the 90 on this one? Realistically, it's probably going to come down to your budget. I think you will enjoy this whiskey. I think that you will like it quite a bit, but if that's a stretch for your budget, if you're going to have to strain to pick it up, you might be okay to pass on it for a little while unless you really understand what your flavor preferences are, and maybe this is right up your alley. And in that case, there's no hesitation on my part recommending this in terms of its quality. So I think in terms of a score, this is going to fall in line with some of the 10-year-old whiskeys that I've reviewed recently, right? I've recently done the Ardbeg 10 and the Arran 10, and I gave both of those a 7, with a little bit of caveats, being that the Arran 10 is something that is just really hitting the spot for me in terms of a particular flavor. And if you twisted my arm, I would probably give it an 8 out of 10, but trying to give a score that I think is representative, I gave it a 7. In the Ardbeg 10, I gave a 7, but if you twisted my arm in terms of, again, my personal preference, maybe a 6, but I still recognize it as being a fantastic representative of Islay Scotch whiskey. So obviously those are both significantly younger than this, and they are probably coming in $25, $30 cheaper than the Glen Moray 18-year-old. All in all, though, I think this is on par with those, since I do not include price and value into my scores. This is also going to come in at 7 out of 10. So I do really enjoy this style of whiskey right now, and it does have a flavor in there that has intrigued me. It's really good. That ginger and peach tea note that I pick up is nice. It's pleasant. It's not dominant. It doesn't last a long time, but it's there, and I enjoy focusing in on that. But let's talk a little bit more about 18-year-old single malts in general, and why this is a great example of why the other distilleries and their 18-year-old single malts are starting to tick a lot of people off. So while I do that, I'm going to use this as an excuse to pour another dram that hopefully I'll review at some point. But this is a 14-year-old Glen Moray. That was a bit of a group selection back in Colorado. There's it's a whiskey and cigar group. The Colorado Gentlemen's Society, they selected this. And this Glen Moray is one of my favorite bottles on the shelf. I'm just going to set these things aside. Grab this other glass. All right, now this is 14 years old. It just says aged in oak cask. This is bourbon cask as well. Again, you look at these things. The 18 is slightly darker than this, so you might wonder if that's the color, if it's just the extra 4 years. But this is coming in at 53.5%, so a little bit higher. Not all that much higher, right? Just about 6.3%, right? Yes, it's distilled in 2007, bottled in 2022, 14 years old. And as I mentioned, this is one of my favorite bottles on my shelf at the moment, and one of the kick in the pants that alerted me to loving bourbon matured single malt Scotch. And being a Glen Moray, it was my first experience with them, and got me excited to try some more. And realistically, this is the first bottle of Glen Moray I've ever owned, and the 18-year-old is the second. And maybe it was just a little bit of nerves in terms of I don't want to ruin it, but the 18-year-old is good enough to make sure that I keep exploring. But here we go. Cheers. Yeah, I'll do a review of this one at some point, but it's tropical, it's citrusy, it's malty, it's vanilla, it's bright, it's chocolatey, it's like everything a bourbon matured whiskey can be at the same time, and it is just magically melded together. And this is just one of my all-around favorites, an example of the type of whiskey that I love right now. So Glen Moray, $18, $90. Many of these other 18-year-old single malts, 130, 150, 200, and above. Well, why is that? Well, the simple answer is because the distillery said it is. Because there is no real reason why there should be that massive of a difference between one well-presented 18-year-old single malt and another. The one thing you could attribute the difference in price to would be barrel type, specifically bourbon casks versus sherry casks. Sherry casks are known to be more expensive. However, there are good sherry casks, and there are crappy sherry casks, and there are refill sherry casks, and there are recharged sherry casks, there are re-seasoned sherry casks, etc., etc. So knowing exactly what you're getting is a little bit of a crapshoot, but if you are Dalmore, your entire marketing shtick and the reason why you say you can charge so much more is because you scour the world for the finest casks that have ever existed to mankind, and every single bottle of whiskey that Dalmore has ever sold has been in one of these hand-selected, cask, which is ridiculous. They sell like 8 million bottles of whiskey a year. So there is a difference there. And in some cases, that difference might be significant. But it's impossible for us consumers to know exactly what kind of casks are being used in terms of the overall quality, in terms of, especially when it's these large vattings. But generally that cost is not going to be 2 or 3 times the price per bottle. Because outside of that, the only ingredients used to make Scotch malt whiskey is malted barley, yeast, and water. Barley prices change, but generally speaking, most distilleries are going to use very similar barley varietals. They're probably even buying it from the same exact malting facility, as very few of them have their own malting floors. And yeast might be proprietary. It might be something that they buy and bring in. But even then, like, those prices are generally set. It's paid for, it's put into a barrel, and it's put into a warehouse. Now, these are, generally speaking, like dunnage-style warehouses. These are not climate controlled. These are buildings that are usually exposed to the ground. As I mentioned, they are not climate controlled unless you're talking one of the major facilities, maybe Rose Isle, and some of these newer, more modern manufacturing plants might have climate controlled warehouses or heat cycled warehouses, that sort of thing, a la Old Forester here in the States. So in terms of aging, the costs are maintaining the warehouse, maybe doing cask maintenance, and then obviously paying the workers to maybe move barrels around or pull things in and out, and just the general work that needs to happen to maintain the entire warehouse full of whiskey. And then the only other thing we can really mention is angel share. All right, so angel share, meaning just the evaporation of both water and alcohol into the environment in Scotland, generally ranges from about 2 to 3%. In comparison, in Kentucky, this is generally thought to be a little bit higher due to the climate conditions being a little bit hotter and drier, being up to 10% depending on the seasons. So those percentages are per year, and after 18 years of even 2 to 3% losses, you are missing a pretty good chunk of your barrel. But again, Glen Moray 18 is also aged in Scotland, right alongside all of these other premium brands. The climate isn't necessarily going to be that significantly different, at least in terms of the amount of evaporation happening. So again, we're not necessarily talking about what it should cost. Obviously, we're seeing an 18-year-old single malt Scotch, 47%, being sold for $90, which proves that it doesn't cost that much to age a whiskey for that long in Scotland. So when these brands start telling you that it's super rare and, oh, the angel share is so much and it's just so hard to keep up with demand, and it, as I've mentioned before, it's bullshit. These people are charging what they can, what they believe the market will stand. And if Glen Moray could sell their bottles for $200, they probably would. They would probably leave these lower price points to the blends, to the ubiquitous, like the Johnny Walkers and the Chivas Brothers and the Dewars and that sort of thing. But they don't do a lot of marketing. Again, they could probably save a few bucks if they got rid of the dumb box it comes in. And even if they're adding color, that's an extra cost as well. And you're putting in a box, so you can't see the bottle on the shelf anyways. Regardless, it's a perfect example that these other distilleries, that yes, in some cases, they know that their products are going to be put up for sale. They're going to sell out immediately at whatever price they sell it at. And being that their product is going to be a quote-unquote collector's item, it's just going to be on the auctions for 2 or 3 times the price anyways. So it does make sense for them to try to figure out what people are willing to pay for their product and sell it for that price. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them, generally speaking, to let other people, just you and me, make profits off of their product because we were first in line. Now, not every distillery does this. Famously, Springbank, one of the most sought after, hardest to get whiskeys in the world, They're Scotland's Buffalo Trace, essentially, right? They've kept their retail prices pretty fair outside of their more premium, like limited edition 30-year-old whiskeys and that sort of thing, that they've said, nope, we're not giving up that much money. If you want to buy one of these, you're going to have to pay for it, which again is totally fine. Those whiskeys sell for thousands of dollars immediately. They hit the retail market. The very next auction cycle, they're up there. And I don't blame Springbank for trying to get a little bit of money for that kind of stuff. But some of these other whiskeys, it's a little bit of a different story, right? We can talk about a whole bunch more of these types of things. And I don't want this video to be too long, but like, obviously, if you throw a ton of marketing, Ardbeg is a great example of this. You spend a ton of money on marketing. Well, somebody's going to have to pay for that, right? That money is coming from somewhere. That's not a donation that someone's making. That's factored into the cost of your bottles. Where if you didn't do that, and you were just able to sell yourself completely on your reputation, a la Springbank, and you have like one person on Instagram tweeting pictures that they took themselves out around into your property, you get to sell your bottles for cheaper because you don't have to pay these marketing firms or comic book artists or celebrities to market your whiskey. You can just sell it and it disappears off the shelf, and you can keep it at a fair price for the people who do truly actually love your whiskey, and you accept that, yeah, some of it's going to end up on the auction houses. The main point of this is it doesn't cost that much per year to age whiskey, right? All the costs are spread out across every barrel in the warehouse, and yes, you have to sell your whiskey at a point where you can buy materials to make more whiskey, and that is more expensive today. And yes, inflation has been bad recently, but obviously a lot of the distilleries are either you can look at it one of two ways: taking advantage of the situation, taking advantage of the boom, or you can look at it as they are almost protecting their brand, or like they want their bottles on the shelf. And if other people are going to buy their bottles for a lower price, turn around and sell it for 2 or 3 times that on the secondary markets, I can see where most companies aren't really going to tolerate that. And somebody's going to say, even especially if you have shareholders or investors, they're going to say, whoa, wait a minute, why aren't we making that money? I can rant about this for a while. The point of this is Glen Moray 18 is a good, solid whiskey. It is a good representative of a particular style of like your classic bourbon matured Speyside Scotch whiskey. It might not blow you away, but I haven't been disappointed with a single dram of this yet. And I only imagine that this bottle is probably going to open up and continue to evolve over time. And I'm really looking forward to that. All right, keep tuning in for these 18-year-old single malt reviews. It's been fun getting a little bit deeper into the weeds, and we'll see how this turns out, because I don't actually know. This is part of a journey for me as well. It's part of my whiskey journey, and getting to know some of these, being my first bottle of Glen Moray 18, although this one is really good. Keep an eye out for independent bottlings of Glen Moray, because at least this one is fantastic. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for all of your support. If you can, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, you want to keep track of my opinion on these 18-year-old single malts, and leave a comment if you have an opinion on any of these. What's your favorite? Have you had the Glen Moray 18? Where do you kind of put it in the grand scheme of things in terms of single malts and at its current price point? And of course, if you are enjoying the podcast, or if you're looking for a podcast to listen to, my brother and I have been currently reacting to the Dram Phase Top 40 poll that came out at the end of February. We'll be recording numbers 1 through 10 this weekend, so that will come out next Friday. We just released the numbers 11 through 20, which would have came out, if this is on Monday, this came out on Friday. So check that out. It's on YouTube as well. But if you want to listen to it in your car, they are over 2 hours long, or this recent one was over 2 hours long. But yeah, thank you guys for all your support and all your comments. Really appreciate it. And until next time, cheers.